Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we will be doing another alien UFO story. And I know you guys have heard us we've just done half a dozen of these things, and I attribute that to I guess with the last couple that we did, there was a lot of interest in it because we've had a surge in user submissions about their experiences with UFOs and alien abductions. Now, this particular story came to me in a very different way, actually. An older woman phoned me at work, and this was not related to my work or anything like that. And she just started telling me this story, and it being my forte and my interests, I had to get it from her. I had to get her story. So as it happened, she really wanted to get it out. She's 78 years old, something she's been living with, wanting to get this out for a long time. It's like, I guess, a personal secret. And she knows, she's old. She wants it out there. So that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to tell her story. But before we do that, I just want to remind everybody that if you have an effed up story on the paranormal, whatever the case is, hauntings, demonic possession, UFOs, aliens, cryptid creatures, we dig all that stuff. I'd love to get your story, get it into a podcast, get it on the website. And to do that, you can submit that to us at the official website, which is effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. And go to the menu, go to submissions, fill out the form, hit submit, and it will be done. One other quick little update. We have the t-shirts. I'm just mentioning this because, a couple people have mentioned, they popped onto the website. Where's the t-shirts? Where's the t-shirts? They could be here within the next day. It could be a week or two. I'm just waiting for the ones Ryan sent me to show up in the mail. But we do have them. They're definitely coming. They're very exclusive. Just be on the lookout for, we're going to be doing a podcast on the Mandela effect. And in that podcast, we're going to be showing off the t-shirts and showing you how and where you can buy them. So yeah, keep in tune to that. And with that said, we're going to jump into the story for the night. Now, this story comes from, I'm just going to use her first name. Her name is Shirley. Once again, she is a 78-year-old woman. It's a story that really affected her on a very personal level. It's something that tore her marriage apart. Big thing for her. And she's been living with this on her own for all of this time. And she wants to get that story out, especially as she's getting older. She wants the story out. So that's what we're going to do. So, this actually took place back in 1973. So Shirley had, she had been married, she got divorced, and in this place in Newfoundland called Bonavista, she met this guy named John. He had worked at NATO for 6 years before they had met. And he was very technical. He had this very large array of technical skills on a level that's above most, I think. And in any case, he ended up, when he left doing what he was doing for NATO, he went to this place called Cape Bonavista, which is in Newfoundland, actually where Ryan and I are from. Not Cape Bonavista, but Newfoundland. Just to make it more confusing, right? I've actually never been to Cape Bonavista. But anyway, that's where he went. And his job, again, he had to go on to these strange jobs. He could never tell Shirley what he was doing, just except to say that he was doing technical work, right? He was very secretive about what he did and what he worked on, despite, her asking him what it is exactly that he did. But she gave us some background. Like, she did know that he worked on at this place called Wolf Island, which is in Ontario, and he worked on a secret transmitter in Cape Bonavista. Again, it was very secretive. She said that, it was up on this large hill. He had to take this very out of the way dirt road to get there. And there was like this mobile home near the top of the hill, I guess, where they stayed while they were doing some of this work. And anyway, so he had, these are two different places that he worked on. So he worked at, Wolf Island before he met Shirley. And then, he met Shirley in Cape Bonavista while he was working on this transmitter. And after a time working on that, whoever he worked for, because she doesn't even know, wanted to send him to Shirley Island, which is in Ontario. And apparently, she didn't know this at the time, but, she found it later and had told us, just for the sake of the story, that what he was going to work on was allegedly the first UFO tower ever built in the world. And apparently that was in Shirley Island. So at this current time, they were in Bell's Corner, because after, he had done this work in Cape Bonavista, he didn't know where he was going to end up work-wise. And they assumed that his next job was going to be out in Bell's Corner, which is a subdivision of Ottawa. But that's not exactly what happened. They got out there thinking that's where they were going to be, but whoever his employer was wanted him to work in Shirley Island. So with that, they left. Shirley had a daughter, and so what they were going to do was Shirley dropped her daughter off at the bus stop, and John and Shirley were going to drive, to her sister's place. And they figured that for sure they were going to get there before their, her daughter, because, the bus was going to be making stops, and they were just going to be going on this one continuous ride. So anyway, they left Bell's Corner after dropping, the daughter off at the bus stop, and they were on this highway known as Highway 417. So that goes from Bell's Corner, I guess, to Toronto, for anyone who's familiar with the geography. So on this trip, and Shirley said just as they got out of Bell's Corner, she noticed this very bright yellow light in the sky. So much so that she remarked this to John, and she said, "That plane has some very bright lights." And, before she knew it, it appeared to her that the plane was crashing. And so she was saying, "John, that plane is crashing. Look. And it was weird because it wasn't falling forwards like you would expect a plane to fall, but it was actually falling, or appeared to be falling, kind of sideways, almost like it was coming towards them." And basically what happened was it kind of went up and started to fly parallel to the car, and that, by this time they realized this is no plane. And when John noticed it, that's actually what he said, "That's no plane." And before they could speak again, it was just this eerie silence, and it was just flying parallel to the car. And, Shirley tried to describe this for me. She said it was definitely a UFO. She said it was yellow, bright yellow, on certain elements, and then faded to a dull yellow, but it was black on top and the yellow was underneath. And she said that she couldn't see inside of it at all, but it was a typical saucer shape. So it was yellow on bottom, black on top. And she said it flew for a few minutes parallel to them. And I guess they were kind of in shock and just trying to take in what this was. But Shirley did remark that it made no sound whatsoever. It was completely quiet. And she said as quickly as it was there, it was gone. And then, she was like, "It's gone. Where the hell does this thing go?" And that's when she notices that it's now behind them. And she's I guess stressing at this point that, "John, this thing's behind us. It's behind us." And John is speeding. He's going as fast as he can. All indications seem to be that John knew what this was. While this was all new and very frightening to Shirley, And I'm sure it was frightening to John as well, but there was something about this that he knew what this was. It wasn't like this completely new idea to him. And the next thing Shirley remembered was that everything was fading out. And she described it as being similar to passing out, like as if you were being put to sleep with anesthesia, like when you're getting surgery. And, she remembers John telling her to shush, but everything just continued to fade out. And Shirley had the impression, again, that, John was very aware of what this was. So they black out, I guess. Shirley does for sure. This is where her memory blanks out. And now we're going to have some missing time. Because the next thing that Shirley remembers is being on the side of the street with the vehicle parked next to her sister's house, which is in Toronto. So they're there now. They're at their destination. And this is where things just start to fall apart. She said she remembers, for example, people helping her out of the car, somewhat helping her up the driveway, but she don't remember seeing anybody. She just, she was in a daze, just like as if you had woken up from surgery, like from being knocked out from anesthesia. So she has this vague recollection, and, she remembers hands being on her and helping her out and up the driveway, but she has no idea who it was or whatever. And, when she got up close to the door, she remembers her sister bursting out of it. And she's screaming at her. Basically, her daughter had been at the bus stop, I guess, and called her sister because she hadn't been picked up yet. So her sister's screaming at her at the door. She's saying, Susie's down at the bus stop. She's crying her heart out. She called 2 hours ago. Where were you guys? Like, what the hell happened? And, and just to go back for a second, her daughter should have gotten there first. The daughter was on a bus that was going to be making several stops along the way, and they were driving continuously. Now we have missing time, but they figured they should have been there an hour before the daughter. And here they are now, and they're at least 2 to 3 hours late after this had taken place. So, when she got there, oddly enough, when John came in the door, she asked where he was going because, she's Shirley's still kind of in a daze. And John just, apparently he was going down to pick up Susie at the bus stop. But I guess the part that I found weird about it was that after such an event, you'd expect that they'd be sitting down and really trying to figure out what had just happened. But John just went right back to, this is life. We're going to go pick up the daughter. You know what I mean? Like he just jumps into this thing as if he wasn't as phased as much as you expect that he would be. But in any case, after they did that and they kind of pulled themselves together, they went back to the apartment and they decided that they weren't going to talk about this, because they assumed that people would think they were crazy. Now, remember, this is back in 1978. People are worried about being labeled crazy today with this kind of a story. Back then, it was almost taboo, right? So anyway, apparently at the time that this had taken place, and they were in the apartment, they were actually watching TV, and they saw reports on there that there were other sightings in the area. And so they had discussed the idea of, telling their story, getting their story out. But John had been planning on getting another job, and he didn't want to ruin the chances of getting that job, which he believed would happen if they made this story public. He would probably be labeled crazy and nobody would hire him. That was, their reasoning behind it. So they didn't say anything. But that said, that's not where the story ends. After this event had taken place, Shirley actually changed in some areas. She says that she since then, she feels more enlightened. She gets answers that she don't know where they come from. She knows things that she doesn't feel that she's, she has no recollection of ever finding out or reading about. Like, she just knows things and she don't know how that came to be. She's got this sudden flair for writing. Her whole outlook on religion changed. Like, she doesn't believe in standard religion anymore, which is something that she was like before that. And John and Shirley's relationship completely changed after that. They actually they did get divorced. Shirley said that immediately after that event, John became a different man. She doesn't know if it was like PSTD or what the case was, but he was different. And anyway, after so many years, I guess they kept in touch and stuff like that, and they started to make contact again, and they were going to try to, they were getting back together. And so John was in the Netherlands, and Shirley went to visit, and somehow the topic came up. So Shirley wanted to talk again. She brought up the event that happened all these years ago with this UFO. And, she specifically mentioned to John that she doesn't remember anything happening to her. For her, it's just missing time. Like, she remembers blacking out, right after seeing the UFO, and then she's at her sister's house. She doesn't remember anything. But she said, John said, well, something happened to me. And it was too personal. He wouldn't even tell her about it, right? I mean, they were married. He just wouldn't mention it. He wouldn't tell her. He wouldn't tell anybody. He absolutely refused, and she said he would go completely white when the topic would come up. And, so it's obviously something very traumatic happened to him, and it's anybody's guess to what it was, because he wouldn't even tell his wife. But he did say that if Shirley had ever gone to anybody and told that story, whether that was the public or friends or whoever, that he would vehemently deny that it ever happened. And, I guess it would make her look silly, but that's essentially what he said. He just absolutely wanted nothing to do with it. So that is the story. What's your take on that, Ryan?
Well, again, in a lot of these cases that we've received lately, some that we've covered on podcasts and some that we've just uploaded to the site, there's a lot of very classic elements, and I know that it's a term that I've been using a lot lately, but I guess it mirrors the kind of the way that I'm thinking about these things. And, I've always been interested in the paranormal and UFOs and this kind of thing, anything that's the extra normal, as it were. But lately, I've been taking a closer look at, how these stories are pairing up with one another. That, here we have kind of a unique situation where, well, at least unique in our lives, that we get the opportunity to see the firsthand accounts from so many different people, from so many different backgrounds, and in some cases across large periods of time. And these different events, in this case, it's a UFO abduction story. There's some very, referred to as classic, but these very characteristic events that seem to coincide with the experiences. Missing time, strange lights, and even to the point that it almost, in a way, seems to be targeting her husband. This guy who is connected with, military and perhaps, as she put it, like these UFO watchtowers. I know Shirley mentioned that several times, that there were these, kind of secretive towers that were installed that she was under the impression that they were there to monitor UFO activity. So, the fact that he specifically remembers this terrifying experience where she has no memory whatsoever, almost seems like it's kind of a targeted event to me.
That's actually a very interesting takeaway. I hadn't even thought of it. I did think, however, that he there was something tying him to it, and I thought it might have been because of his work. I mean, obviously, we know now for sure that he had been working on these UFO towers, and my guess, he did work with NATO, but my guess is that he probably worked with the military to some extent on top secret UFO and or alien related work. And so,
well, it really makes me wonder if, when I sat down and really had to process everything she told us, because, it really was a long story. The way it was told originally. But, it took a while for me to kind of process what she had said. And I got to thinking, what would be the reasoning, if advanced beings from another part of the galaxy or universe even came here for some purpose, whether that was experimentation or whatever, I would at least assume that they would have some, a great degree of success with, their mind waping technology or memory waping technology or memory altering technology. And while it seems to have worked perfectly on Shirley, she has no memory of being inside of a craft or having any direct contact or of anything whatsoever after, this thing was chasing them. And then she just talks about, this sense of like fading out, almost like she's passing out. Whereas her husband, or ex-husband, I should say, he is very clearly affected in a very deep way. And I gave a lot of thought to, what could they have done? Perhaps it was, hideous experimentation. I've read some pretty disturbing accounts related to hybrids, men who've been presented with the hybrid or their hybrid child. It's their child, but it's sperm that was taken from them and implanted into a non-human egg and then allowed to grow into a being. So they see themselves reflected back in this non-human form, which is, I think is something that would probably reach to the very center of the uncanny valley. It's not just seeing a human face on a non-human thing. It's seeing your human face on a non-human thing. And I would imagine that something like that would have to be deeply psychologically, scarring, damaging. And we certainly see this kind of a thing reflected in his behavior. He refuses to talk about it for decades. According to her, up until today, I don't know if she said whether or not if he's still alive, but I'm going to go ahead and assume that she's either had no contact with him or he's absolutely refused to talk about it at all. To the point of, or even to the degree of saying, no, I will categorically deny. And I remember her speaking specifically about, like when they were married and her becoming exasperated with him, like, you're making me look like a crazy person in front of our children, at least admit something happened. And still, even faced with the reality of this, obviously at this point it was damaging their marriage, and he refused. So it leads me to believe that there must be some motive behind this kind of reaction in him. And if indeed there was a motive, then the only thing I could think of was that they were trying to deter him. Now, all we get from Shirley's story is that this man was very skillful and very intelligent in his field of work. He was very knowledgeable with electronics, and obviously his services were in demand. And so, I'm of the mind that if this is true, and, I take all these stories and talk about them from that point of view, but if it is true and he is as good as she says he was, then, perhaps there was some kind of an effort made on the part of some non-human intelligence to not so much deter the government, but, deter these individuals. Every generation that has certain special individuals who have very unique ways or innovative ways of tackling problems and very unique ways of understanding things. And that goes for, every generation and every country. And, maybe this man in this instance was an example of somebody who was somewhat of a technological savant, that, there was something special about him, and that these entities knew that and said, yeah, we have to take him off of the board of players. We can deal with their government trying to learn about us, but we got to make sure that any of these guys who really understand what they're doing, we got to make sure that they're too afraid to keep working. And, in this case, it really does seem to have worked. He isolated himself from his family and, eventually broke off all contact with his wife and, arguably fled Canada back to his home country.
Well, I think your line of thinking there with the idea that he was something special with his skills, that is kind of along the lines of how I feel about it. I wonder if, because she mentioned several times, made note of how exceptional he was at his trade. And, she did recall seeing the radio transmitter that he worked on. And I remember her saying that there, it looked like something on a ship. There was just dials everywhere. There was, it was very complicated, big piece of machinery that he had worked on. And I wonder if, in the effort to find new technology, let's face it. We know that he was going to work on the very first UFO tower. It sounds like the other two places he worked on were somehow related in the same field of whatever they were trying to do. And I wonder if he didn't stumble upon something. It's just like when somebody stumbles onto a secret of the mafia or something like that, and they catch wind about it, and they come to make the message very clear that, or they either wipe you out or they make it very clear that, if you don't back off, you're going to disappear, right?
The classic severed horse head in the bed. Exactly.
And again, like you pointed out, the fact that Shirley has no recollection of it, he obviously does, is obviously very traumatic for him, whatever it was that happened to him. I wonder if that wasn't a message, like you said, to scare him off, or maybe it was something different. Like sometimes I wonder if, abductees, for example, are not chosen to some degree. Like a lot of abductee stories, like they don't have one story. you know, they've been noticing strange things ever since they were a child. Or maybe, you know, they get up one day and they remember a certain event. They start researching. I mean, we've gotten stories like this. You know, someone comes to us, they tell us what happened. It's like, okay, I you know, one day I recall that this happened to me, and then I started researching it, and then I landed on one of your podcasts. I mean, that I've gotten a dozen emails at least that started like that. And then they say, you know, they went to see a hypnotic, you know, someone who could do hypnotic regression on them. And then all of a sudden, all these things start coming out that they had buried in their subconscious mind. And, you know, so what we're looking at is not one event, or what they thought was one event is not one event. It's like a whole lifetime of things that have just been buried.
Well, that makes perfect sense, because, you know, when we perform any kind of a scientific study on a population of organisms, you know, I mean, I've personally been involved in such a study. You know, when I spent a summer working for Parks Canada, and we were literally catching dragonflies and writing numbers on their wings in indelible marker and re-releasing them in an effort to find out, you know, how far they migrated, what their the recapture rate was like, how many parasites were on them if we recaptured them. You know, there's all these different things. So when you're trying to understand a population, you know, recapturing or recollecting the same living creatures, it gives you a lot of information. All right, well, we haven't seen this guy in 2 years. You know, oh, now he has intestinal parasites. You know, he's developed astigmatism. You know, the years haven't been kind to him for this reason or that reason. In a purely scientific point, or from a purely scientific point of view, I could certainly understand why reabduction, you know, and for that matter, something that you hear about a lot about is generational abduction, where it's not just, you know, like some woman finds out that she's been abducted, only to find out that her father and all her uncles and aunts have memories of abduction, and digs even deeper to discover that her grandparents were abducted.
So do you think in that case there would be something, you know, some trace of something they're following in their DNA?
Well, you know what? That's a great question. And I know that a lot recently, there's been a lot of talk about certain blood types, in particular, Rh negative blood type. And there seems to be some correlation between people with that blood type and people who get abducted. Now, it's not in every case. Not everybody with Rh negative blood gets abducted. And it's not always the case that every abductee has that blood type. But, you know, if we take anything away from, you know, just assuming that every abduction story that you've ever heard is true, right? And we'll just take the average details of all these stories and think about it for a second. This has been going on for decades, right? Like, and maybe for centuries. There are some stories that go back into, you know, the 1800s, 1700s, 1600s, all the way back through the history of man.
There's old paintings with UFOs in them.
Old paintings with UFOs. Even the old stories of fairies and demons and spirits and the various abductions that take place are so very similar to modern day UFO abductions that it really begs the question, is there, you know, a breeding program? Is there some kind of a long-term study? Is there something in our blood, in our DNA? Is there something about being human that is different and unique and interesting? You know, it doesn't mean that we're special, you know. It just means that, oh, look, I found this weird frog in the jungle and it may have medicinal properties, so I'm going to study it for a few generations. Well, you know, 25 years is what we usually refer to as a generation, might seem like a long time for us. If these researchers live for centuries or millennia or have no defined endpoint for their natural lifespan, then a study that takes into account decades or hundreds or thousands of years really isn't that strange. You know, simply maybe has nothing to do with their lifespan, and that they're just from a very evolved society who has a very long viewpoint. So when, you know, they initiate a study program, it's understood that they're just going to keep studying, because who knows what you're going to find? Who knows what emerging characteristics in the human population, what information that will yield. We're an amazing race of creatures, right? We do everything from climb the tallest mountains to swim the deepest seas, paint the most beautiful pictures, you know, and come up with the most complicated scientific ideas. You know, if anything, we're a perfect example of how diverse a single species can be. You know, the only difference between a caveman hunting an early deer with a spear or a club and an astronaut
is a couple of drinks.
Is a couple of drinks. is a behavior. You know, is literally behavior. Right? And you know, that might come down to a couple of drinks, but ultimately, if you take a human being, if you could go back in time and grab a human being from 140,000 years ago and grab that baby or whatever and bring them back to today and raise them on, you know, I was trying to think of a modern band, but I couldn't for the life of me. How old am I? You know, raise them on modern pop music and Facebook and cell phones. They'd you know, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between this throwback human and any modern human. Really, there's you know, there's no difference in terms of intelligence. So the thing that has really made us different is behavior. So I mean, maybe they're studying that. You know. And of course, we'd be remiss if we didn't, you know, talk about the supposed hybridization program, because that's something that comes up over and over again.
Well, before we jump into that, there is an element to the story that I do want to revisit, because like up to this point, we kind of, you know, we focused this on, okay, this is all John. You know, Shirley was knocked out. She wasn't part of whatever happened, but she did come back different. She came back with, you know, these skills she never had before. You know, this she had writing skills that came out of nowhere. She suddenly was intuitive. She, you know, her religion changed. I mean, so she can't remember what happened, but something had to have happened to her that changed her, at least on a subconscious level.
Well, you're very right. You're very right. I've kind of, I didn't forget about it, but I've, you know, kind of moved in a different direction. That's a very interesting aspect of the abduction phenomenon, and it's not an altogether isolated one to this story, right? We see this kind of thing in other abduction stories, where people become more artistic, more thoughtful. They think deeper, and you know, while you could explain a couple of these cases away by saying, you know, well, such an experience would, you know, if you think of the average human being, you know, they are what I was just talking about a minute ago. They're raised on fucking pop music and pop culture and literal soda pop, and, you know, just pop this and pop that, all this junk, all the
Too
junk
much
society.
Pop. It is. It's the McDonald's of music.
Exactly. So, you know, the average person is raised in that manner. And when faced with such a paradigm shattering, I mean, it's not a shift, for the average human being to be, I mean, all of us that live and breathe and eat and sleep the paranormal and UFOs, it may not be that shattering of an event, but imagine somebody who only listens to, country music and reads their Bible and go watches sports and shoots their guns, and they don't leave that world. They don't ever go outside of that world. Suddenly they're abducted, pulled up into an alien UFO, confronted with the real the reality that extraterrestrial life exists, that the universe is probably filled with all these different forms of life, that you're no longer the center of the galaxy. I mean, that's life-changing. And yeah, those kinds of people, you could say, sure, you'd start questioning your religion. You would have to start thinking deeper. You couldn't experience something like that and just go back. All right, well, let's go see what the latest Katy Perry album is, or, I wonder how the Dodgers are doing today. You would almost be forced into this new frame of mind. But it's not just that. We see it so many times with these, people are abducted, they come back, and suddenly they have new skills. It's almost like some barrier has been removed on the mind, And maybe that's part of the study. Maybe that's part of the program,
Seeing what happens
what would happen if we just like tweaked up the neurotransmitters just a little bit, we just made the brain run more efficiently, just a couple of percent. What would the overall effect would be, And just like we do in science, you do it small scale. And then you multiply your small scale results against the large scale numbers, and then you can extrapolate what would happen if everybody was like this or whatever. I'm merely speculating here, but to me there does seem to be some very, in a lot of these cases, and this being one of them, that I do see there being some, scientific methodology being applied, that, there seems to be some, it's not just a random event, right? And I mean, a lot of the times when you hear, people from outside of the paranormal world or the UFO world talk about this stuff, they always talk about it as if it was this random intergalactic chance meeting, that's...
Well, I think what it is that it could be randomized to the degree of who they pick initially, but I do think you're right. I think they pick out their subjects, and they follow them.
But not why they're doing it, right?
No, I think
that's
they
what
have,
I mean by the random aspect.
Yeah, I think they have like a goal in mind. Just like when we do clinical trials, or for example, when scientists or health professionals are doing, studies on certain people from certain generations or locations, like, well, what's the life expectancy of people of population A versus population B when the differential factors are, the toxicity of, their climate here versus, there's all these different things that people have, scientists and health professionals have studied over decades. Some of these experiments are, they have to take place over 10, 15, 20 years. And I mean, sometimes now we're finally getting to see what the results of some of these studies are. And perhaps that is what aliens are doing. They're doing research. I mean, maybe they come down and they actually do put something in the atmosphere. Maybe they do put, implant a chip, because we've heard many stories like that too. What happens if we implant this chip? But maybe it really is to read out different, levels of chemicals in the body, or whatever over time. You know, there is a theory. There's this idea that aliens are dying off, and you know, for whatever reason, the only way that they can keep their race alive is to interbreed with humans, right? I mean, we've all heard this this idea, but maybe it's not so simple as that. Maybe there has to be a very close matchup with certain chemicals or blood types or DNA or who knows what it is. And in order to, I guess, pick out who the candidates are, they have to come down and do these tests. And by doing that, they can, you know, map out, you know, whose family line or, you know, who's who's relatable DNA.
So you're thinking that, like, you know, 1 in a million would be compatible for something like this, and that just because, you know, you're the daughter of somebody who was compatible doesn't necessarily mean that you're compatible too. So we got to watch your whole bloodline over the course of generations, because, you know, we can't find all the compatible people. So we got to look everywhere and look the hardest. Yeah, that's an interesting take on it.
Right. I mean, if you were a dying species and you know, you were trying to prolong it, and this is the only, you know, you had to meet a very specific criteria as a match, as a donor, as a whatever, you know, you'd have to play that very carefully. And I mean, this can get as wide and bizarre as you want. I mean, you can speculate in a million different ways. I mean, there's a whole idea that, you know, the government has this, you know, this secret deal with aliens that they're allowed to abduct so many people a year. And then there's the theory
that's the whole Eisenhower Treaty.
Yeah, and then there's the theory that this, you know, all these people that go missing in the national parks, well, that's, you know, the result of this treaty. Like, you know, this is where it happens. You know, like
these are the abduction zones that have been agreed upon.
Right, and anything that happens outside of that is them breaking the rules, right? I mean, and really, we have no idea. This is completely speculative, but you know, there's a lot of different theories, and depending on how you line them up, you know, to work within one another, right? I think you end up with some of these questions. You know, we know one theory says that the aliens are dying. We got this one theory that they're interbreeding. We got this one theory that, well, we know there was a deal where they're allowed to abduct humans in exchange for technology. Then there's the theory that there's these designated places for it to happen. So, you know, speculating from that, I think that, you know, some of these ideas kind of make sense. They kind of fit.
You know, and I think personally for me, one of the more terrifying versions of the stories is, or these theories would be that, you know, there are certain secret cabals within the governments of the world that have access to very advanced, possibly even extraterrestrial origin technology, and that they use this to abduct people for their own purposes, and that the abduction phenomenon is not something being perpetrated by, you know, these extraterrestrial entities as much as it's being perpetrated by our own governments, and not, you know, the government as a whole. I'm not saying the Department of Fishery and Wildlife is going to scoop you up out of a park, but that there are certain segments, little dark corners of the government, of governments and organizations that possibly have access to very advanced technology and perhaps even memory-altering techniques, drugs or technology, mixed along with hypnosis and who knows what else. And, you know, it all comes together. You know, you hear about it with the cattle mutilation phenomenon, the abduction phenomenon. There's even been, you know, some talks about the crop circle phenomenon being perpetrated by some of these groups, leaving messages for one another, and at the same time pushing forward this extraterrestrial myth. Now, I don't personally believe this, but I do find it an intriguing theory that it is as much of a possibility as extraterrestrials coming from another star 100,000 light years away and doing these things. There still might be extraterrestrials zipping around and observing, but maybe the worst examples of humanity have also gained access to their technology and, are attempting to use it for their own goals, whatever they may be.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I almost feel like I'd rather be abducted by an alien than of one of these shady, government experimental people.
Oh, me too.
Because, man, I'll tell you, some of the creepiest shit I've ever heard have come from our own human race. I mean, not to spiral off this topic, but just all the terrorist attacks that are going on now, all the false flags that we know about, all the conspiracies. We know certain things have come out about experiments that government have carried out on its own people. Towns. Even one case was, I believe it was like a school for, children with disabilities, and where they went in and made this deal that they would basically provide free nutritional food, and ended up being full of like toxins that cause cancer and stuff like that. Just to see what would happen, and it's just some real sick shit. And I don't ever hear of stories like that with aliens. You hear stories where people come back and they're terrified. They've had scary medical procedures, but they come back in one piece. It's terrifying for what it is, but they come back in one piece. They can function. They're not like missing limbs. They're not coming back with crazy shit. I mean, the worst
giant tumors growing on their backs.
Yeah, like the worst thing you hear of really is radiation, and I don't think that's it never seems to be that's a purposeful thing. It just happens to be like when you're around a craft, if it's flying. However, its propulsion system is, there seems to be cases where it gives off very large doses of radiation, and that's just a side effect. But I don't think, they came down with a ray gun and shot people with a radiation weapon and like, here's your cancer, right? I don't think that's the way it works. So
no.
The only other thing, of course, that we heard of, but we really have no idea who does this. We don't. But I mean, there are the stories of human mutilations. Not cow mutilations, but human mutilations. And I remember there is a couple of pictures that you'll find if you Google it, and they're very disturbing.
They're very graphic. So
very graphic. But
but they exist. I believe it was a man out of Brazil.
Probably, yeah, I think so. And the most disturbing part about it is the context that goes with it, and the information on the picture, and that health professionals who studied the body had found that the incisions were in such a way that it didn't even cut cells. I mean, for human technology, we don't know how to do that. It's not technology that, if it exists within our race, we don't know. We don't know if it is top secret.
It's not publicly.
It's not public
shared
domain
information. Yeah.
Yeah. So in any case, what it came down to is, this guy had his asshole cord out. He had, I believe, his eyes were removed. I think I know there was like different parts of his body were dissected,
and it was determined that these procedures were performed while he was alive.
Yeah, he felt it, right, and that is the most disturbing part of it to me.
They can, if you're wondering, they can tell that by certain levels of hormones in your brain and your blood. That like when you're under extreme pain and terror, your body produces very like high levels of certain hormones and chemicals, and if that's detected, then it's likely that, somebody was tortured before they were killed. We do have methods of determining if somebody was alive while they were mutilated or not.
Right. So, I mean,
again, for sick human reasons.
Yeah. So I don't know. Like, I have no idea if that's carried out by aliens or if it's by our own kind. But I'll tell you, that's some scary shit right there. And I can't think of anything really worse. So anyway, I think we've exhausted this story with Shirley. But, again, like, just some elements to point out that are common is, the idea that, the fact that the UFO made no noise, that it flew in impossible ways, and, the fact that, it was disc-shaped, and we have missing time. All of those elements are very common. No matter how strange these stories are, almost all these stories share some of these elements. Even in my own UFO, sighting, that's the thing I noticed most was the no sound thing. I mean, that just really, really stuck with me and jumped out at me. So every time I hear somebody else tell a story and they mention that part, it kind of resonates with me. But again, like, I know my stories are really boring compared to everybody else's. But anyway, so that's some stuff to think about. So I want to thank Shirley for sharing her story. I'm very happy to put it out there. I mean, that was what she wanted us to do. So very happy to do that. Very happy to get the story. And for all of you out there, if you have an effed up story, we'd love to get it from you and get it on the website and into a podcast. So if that's something you're interested in doing, then head on over to effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. Go to the menu, submissions, fill out the form, hit submit, and we'll get that out there. And be on the lookout for the t-shirts coming very soon, very exclusive. So you might want to hop on those when they get here. And with that said, I hope you enjoyed the episode and you will tune in next time.
Thank you very much for listening, everybody. Good night.
Her asking him what it is exactly that he did. But, she gave us some background. Like, she did know that he worked on at this place called Wolf Island, which is in Ontario. And he worked on a secret transmitter in Cape Bonavista. Again, it was very secretive. She said that, it was up on this large hill. He had to take this very out of the way dirt road to get there. And there was like this mobile home near the top of the hill, I guess, where they stayed while they were doing some of this work. And anyway, so he had, these are two different places that he worked on. So he worked at, Wolf Island before he met Shirley. And then, he met Shirley in Cape Bonavista while he was working on this transmitter. And after a time working on that, whoever he worked for, because she doesn't even know, wanted to send him to Shirley Island, which is in Ontario. And apparently, she didn't know this at the time, but, she found out later and had told us, just for the sake of the story, that what he was going to work on was allegedly the first UFO tower ever built in the world. And apparently that was in Shirley Island. So at this current time, they were in Bell's Corner, because after, he had done this work in Cape Bonavista, he didn't know where he was going to end up work-wise. And they assumed that his next job was going to be out in Bell's Corner, which is a subdivision of Ottawa. But that's not really affected her on a very personal level. It's something that tore her marriage apart. Big thing for her. And she's been living with this on her own for all of this time. And she wants to get that story out, especially as she's getting older. She wants the story out. So that's what we're going to do. So this actually took place back in 1973. So Shirley had, she had been married, she got divorced, and in this place in Newfoundland called Bonavista. She met this guy named John. He had worked at NATO for 6 years before they had met. And he was very technical. He had this very large array of technical skills on a level that's above most, I think. And in any case, he ended up, when he left doing what he was doing for NATO, he went to this place called Cape Bonavista, which is in Newfoundland, actually where Ryan and I are from. Not Cape Bonavista, but Newfoundland. Just to make it more confusing, right? I've actually never been to Cape Bonavista. But anyway, that's where he went. And his job, again, he had to go on to these strange jobs. He could never tell Shirley what he was doing, just except to say that he was doing technical work, right? He was very secretive about what he did and what he worked on, despite... Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we will be doing another alien UFO story. And I know you guys have heard us we've just done half a dozen of these things, and I attribute that to I guess with the last couple that we did, there was a lot of interest in it because we've had a surge in user submissions about their experiences with UFOs and alien abductions. Now, this particular story came to me in a very different way, actually. An older woman phoned me at work, and this was not related to my work or anything like that. And she just started telling me this story, and it being my forte and my interests, I had to get it from her. I had to get her story. So as it happened, she really wanted to get it out. She's 78 years old, something she's been living with, wanting to get this out for a long time. It's like, I guess, a personal secret. And she knows, she's old. She wants it out there. So that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to tell her story. But before we do that, I just want to remind everybody that if you have an effed up story on the paranormal, whatever the case is, hauntings, demonic possession, UFOs, aliens, cryptid creatures, we dig all that stuff. I'd love to get your story, get it into a podcast, get it on the website. And to do that, you can submit that to us at the official website, which is effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. And go to the menu, go to submissions, fill out the form, hit submit, and it will be done. One other quick little update. We have the t-shirts. I'm just mentioning this because, a couple people have mentioned, they popped onto the website. Where's the t-shirts? Where's the t-shirts? They could be here within the next day. It could be a week or two. I'm just waiting for the ones Ryan sent me to show up in the mail. But we do have them. They're definitely coming. They're very exclusive. Just be on the lookout for, we're going to be doing a podcast on the Mandela effect. And in that podcast, we're going to be showing off the t-shirts and showing you how and where you can buy them. So yeah, keep in tune to that. And with that said, we're going to jump into the story for the night. Now, this story comes from, I'm just going to use her first name. Her name is Shirley. Once again, she is a 78-year-old woman. It's a story that exactly what happened. They got out there thinking that's where they were going to be, but whoever his employer was wanted him to work in Shirley Island. So with that, they left. Shirley had a daughter, and so what they were going to do was Shirley dropped her daughter off at the bus stop, and John and Shirley were going to drive to her sister's place. And they figured that for sure they were going to get there before their, her daughter, because, the bus was going to be making stops, and they were just going to be going on this one continuous ride. So anyway, they left Bell's Corner after dropping, the daughter off at the bus stop, and they were on this highway known as Highway 417. So that goes from Bell's Corner, I guess, to Toronto, for anyone who's familiar with the geography. So on this trip, and Shirley said just as they got out of Bell's Corner, she noticed this very bright yellow light in the sky. So much so that she remarked this to John, and she said, "That plane has some very bright lights." And, before she knew it, it appeared to her that the plane was crashing. And so she was saying, "John, that plane is crashing. Look. And it was weird because it wasn't falling forwards like you would expect a plane to fall, but it was actually falling, or appeared to be